Welcome to Front Office Bros. Today, we're going to be talking about 8 rookie selections that we love and hate for fantasy football.
Hike!
The NFL draft has come to a close, and so as a result, Joe and I are here to give you some players that we love based on where they went and some that we didn't like so much. So, Joe, are you in the mood for talking about love or hate? What mood are you in right
Um, let's start off with the loving side, Steve.
now? Oh, okay. Loving. All right. So, who did you love, Joe? We got 2 players each.
Yeah, so the first player in the love category here, I went with running back Kaleb Johnson, who got drafted by the Pittsburgh Steelers. And I really feel like this is a really good fit for Kaleb Johnson. He's a tough physical runner and feel like he's, going to be the Najee Harris replacement, who also is that more physical style runner to complement Jaylen Warren, who they already have. And as we've seen before, Najee Harris had plenty of volume and production in that offense before, even with Jaylen Warren getting his touches. So I'm not really concerned about him taking away from Kaleb Johnson, but I think Kaleb Johnson just goes right into that lead back role for the Steelers.
That's interesting. I actually thought about putting him in the hate for me for Kaleb Johnson. I recognize what you're saying that he's a Najee Harris replacement, but I mean, how much zone blocking did the Pittsburgh Steelers end up running last year? I mean, obviously Kaleb Johnson, we had talked about in the pre-draft process that he predominantly, ran in that zone run scheme. And with having possibly no quarterback, they could just stack the box for a guy
I'm
like
pretty
him.
sure they're going to have Aaron Rodgers. There's a
You
reason
are,
that,
okay.
yeah, there's a reason they didn't, feel more need to adjust the quarterback position.
No, they got Will
And
Howard.
I get that, but they heard the owner also talk about it, have conversations during draft night as well, and just seeing how it seemed like things were positive and they were confident that they could get an answer from Aaron Rodgers soon. So I'm thinking Aaron Rodgers will be the quarterback at least for his rookie year here.
I mean, Pittsburgh Steelers running backs have typically done fairly well. I mean, you look at the past, Najee Harris, you've had James Conner, before James Conner, you've had Le'Veon Bell. So, I mean, you've had a lot of guys who do really well. He had decent draft capital in the 3rd round, right? That Kaleb Johnson was drafted. 2nd round probably would have been preferred.
They
But
didn't have one,
ultimately,
so
didn't have one. No, you're right. Did not have one because they traded away for DK Metcalf, so they could acquire him. So I think it's a good landing spot. I would say I like it. I don't love it, but I can understand why you say you love it.
yeah. I mean, you're also not the biggest Kaleb Johnson fan, so I didn't expect you to love this.
Well, you should have said even though I would have told you were a homer, you should have said RJ Harvey, but that's okay.
Yeah,
That's a good landing spot, but that's a cream cake. That's an easy one. So I'll go with my first love here, and it's going to be tight end Terrance Ferguson out of Oregon, a guy who we had talked about in the pre-draft process as a guy who had a lot of intrigue, and he ends up going to the LA Rams. And when you think about the landing spot, I just, to me, all you need to know is what they had to say about the guy during the press conference. You're talking about Sean McVay saying that he saw glimpses of Chris Cooley, which is a name going way, way back. A guy used to play for the Washington Redskins at the time. But he reminded him of that, and even he said he saw flashes of Travis Kelce. Obviously, not saying that he is Travis Kelce, but you look at that tight end room. Tyler Higbee, he's got 1 year left on his contract. He'll be 33 years old at that point. He'll be a goner. And then Colby Parkinson, he has a 2-year contract left, but you're talking about a $9.8 million cap hit this year and then a $9 million cap hit the following year. So I don't think he's really going to be involved. So you're talking about a guy like Ferguson who really is going to have this opportunity to be the guy and really take over. Now, McVay, to my knowledge, really hasn't utilized the tight end, I don't feel like, as much. Higbee did have one really good year. But ultimately, for a guy like Ferguson, you wanted to go to a place where there wasn't too much competition. Doesn't seem like there's that much competition. And it seems like they have big aspirations for him.
Yeah, it definitely does. I mean, whenever you get in can get drafted into one of these creative offenses, like Sean McVay or, with the Vikings with Kevin O'Connell, it's definitely a plus. And I think too, like just being that, outside of Puka Nacua and Devontae Adams, they don't have too much at the wide receiver position either. So that I think just Terrance Ferguson being there should allow them to really use him as an offensive weapon. And problem with Higbee too, like I feel like he'd be better, but he's also been banged up the last couple of years, kind of hasn't played as much as years past. But yeah, I agree with you. I really am in favor of this landing spot for Terrance Ferguson with the Rams.
All right, so who is your next love, Joe?
And my next love is going to be wide receiver Tetairoa McMillan, who ended up getting drafted by the Panthers. And I know, Steve, you're probably not going to like this one too much either, but just of the places, McMillan could have went. You were looking at teams rumored to be like the Jaguars or even the Cowboys. But in those scenarios, he would have been the number 2 to either Brian Thomas Jr. with the Jaguars or CeeDee Lamb with the Dallas Cowboys. But on the Panthers, he's the true number 1 X wide receiver on the outside. I know you think Xavier Legette could be that guy, but to me, in my mind, Xavier Legette's a number 2. He just isn't, really set up to be the ideal X receiver and the number 1 option in that offense. And, saw what Canales was able to utilize Mike Evans. And I know Mike Evans is a different animal. He consistently, gets 1,000 yards every year, but you could just kind of see the vision of how Canales would like to use a guy like McMillan.
I definitely think that I'm in the minority and you're in the majority on this one. I think there are a lot of people who are excited about the Tetairoa McMillan landing spot with the Carolina Panthers. To some of the points that you made with him being, that Mike Evans archetype in a Dave Canales offense. And I think Legette is probably the wide receiver too. Based on that selection, that tells you all we need to know as far as the Carolina Panthers, that they felt the need to go get this guy. I think my biggest question mark with him is the volume. Just purely that. This is a run-first offense. How many times is Bryce going to be throwing the ball? Maybe 25, 30 times a game, maybe. And as a result, even if it is that much, how many targets is McMillan getting? That's my big concern. Now, you could argue that he might not need that many because he could be a red zone threat and get a lot of touchdowns, because who even would you say is the touchdown threat on the Carolina Panthers? Obviously, Thielen had a ton of targets last year in the slot. He's back again, but it's an interesting offense. I mean, now they signed Hunter Renfrow recently, which maybe he's just a camp body. I don't even know if he'll make the team. But I think at the end of the day, I am not as enthusiastic as you are, because I'm more concerned about the volume and whether, will they really create a game plan to get him the ball every game, or will he not? That's my biggest question mark with him.
Yeah, I mean, hey, for where they took him, I mean, taking this guy number 8 in the first round of the draft, they better be getting him the ball and getting him the volume.
I mean, that's unlike you, because you always say it doesn't matter where you're drafted; it depends on how you perform, in training camp and what have you.
Yeah, I do believe in that, but at the same time, I just think there are teams though that be like, we always see it. The guys that get taken in the first round, they get every possible opportunity to succeed, and the team wants them to succeed. So that's all that I mean. Like Dave Canales is going to make sure they try to get McMillan the ball and make him the best guy that he could possibly be.
So my other love is going to be quarterback Jaxson Dart, now of the New York Giants. A guy who was rumored to possibly be a first-round pick. We had heard the Saints being interested, possibly the Giants, but we didn't know, if there'd be a second quarterback. Would it be Shedeur Sanders? Would it be Tyler Shuck? There was a lot of rumors spreading around. It ended up being Dart. And to me, this has got, if you are a believer in Dart, you honestly couldn't get a better situation, in my opinion. He gets the first round draft capital. You have the Giants trading up to go get this guy on the first round. You're pairing him with, I would, maybe a mastermind's a little strong, but for lack of a better term, Daboll's, in my mind, a good, I can't think of a better word, a mastermind on offense. I think he's able to, you saw what he was able to do with Josh Allen. He said that he feels that he sees flashes of that game with Jaxson Dart. So if he was able to kind of bring Allen to, where he started to really break out, I could see a similar thing with Dart. He doesn't have to start right away. He's a guy who I think, will need to take some time to really learn the playbook, kind of get some of the, bad mechanics or what have you out of his system, work with the coaching staff. They got Russell Wilson. They've got Jameis Winston. There's no rush. As long as the Mara family decides to give Dayball and Joe Shane another year, which honestly, if Dart shows some progress towards the end of the year, they probably will keep it. Now, that would be the only danger. If Dayball gets fired, then Dart, you're looking like a Will Levis situation.
I think this pick here at least buys them one additional year just to see how things work out.
I think so too, especially with what they traded to go get this guy. I mean, they didn't trade a future first, but they still traded, quite a bit. So he's got Malik Neighbors, who's one of the best young receivers out there in the game. Got to add some more talent to that offense to kind of support him. But ultimately, you got guys like Tyrone Tracy in the backfield. They drafted Cam Scatabo, who I think will help them. Kind of adds that bruising power back, to complement Tyrone Tracy. So a lot of positives. So I think if you really like Jaxson Dart, I think you can't find a better landing spot at this point.
Yeah, of the available teams to take him, I do think the Giants were the best landing spot for him just because I feel like he just fits what Dayball wants to do. And that's always why, we talked about it. Dart was going to go to the Giants. It wasn't going to be Shedeur Sanders with the Giants. Just two different style quarterbacks. And the athletic ability that Dart has definitely, more so fits with what Dayball's trying to do. You even saw him bring out the athleticism in Daniel Jones and his ability to run and everything. Same type of deal with Jaxson Dart. And then, the one nice thing too is you don't have to throw Jaxson Dart right out there right away and subject him to the harsh New York media. He's got a couple of veterans he can sit behind and learn from, as you mentioned, which is a nice piece for a rookie quarterback.
I will say this, and we don't have to go on this. I don't want this to become a huge tangent. I would have Dart as the number one dynasty rookie quarterback in this class. I would have him above Ward, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, no, he's got the most rushing upside of the, Shedeur Sanders, Cam Ward type of guys. So I totally would agree with that.
I just think I have more confidence in Dayball in what they have in New York. I mean, what does Tennessee really have? I don't even know how long Callahan has, but I would think probably he bought himself some time as well. Even though I think Cam Ward will be the starter week one, I won't say I don't know if any other quarterback, as far as rookies go, will end up starting this year, at least in week one.
I mean, he's got the clearest path. I mean, Chuck with the Saints also could as well.
Yeah, that's true. I guess that's a good point.
Depending on how he does in the battle, like versus Spencer Rattler, or what the heck really is going on with Derek Carr.
So let's head over to the hates. Who do you got there, Joe?
Yeah, so for the hate side, unfortunately, this first guy, man, it pains me to say this, but it's wide receiver Emeka Egbuka, and he's a guy pre-draft. I talked about him. I was excited about this guy. Was hoping he'd go to a better landing spot, but hard to find a much worse landing spot than the Tampa Bay Buccaneers for him. The team that's already got, Mike Evans. They just re-signed Chris Godwin, made him a priority in the offseason. They have Jaylin McMillan from last year, who really came on at the end of his rookie year and showed some flash as well. I just really don't know what the plan is in this offense for a guy like Emeka Egbuka and having all these guys ahead of him, and how there's going to be, enough volume for all these guys.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest problem. You really like the player. I like the player. But him going to Tampa Bay now, you're looking at him, even though, so he's a first-round pick. You're talking about a fifth-year option. So you're looking at him maybe starting to be productive by year 2 or year 3. So this is a guy that if you're a Baker Mayfield owner, you're probably happy because now they have somebody, in waiting to really take over, whether Godwin isn't able to stay healthy or when Mike Evans, eventually retires and no longer with the team. They've got somebody in the stable ready to go. So that's a positive. But you're right. How much opportunity is he truly going to get with all those guys? You're not going to have 4 receiver sets. And I would think they would like McMillan, but I don't know who is this. I don't
Yeah.
know. I'd have to look. I haven't had a chance. I'd be curious to hear what the general manager and Tom Bowles would have to say about this pick and what it says about the other receivers, because it doesn't really make a lot of sense because you can't play all 4.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I didn't hear any of that stuff, from Bowles or the GM and what went behind making this pick either. I don't know if this means that maybe Chris Godwin just isn't as far along in the comeback process as they originally thought, so they took a Egbuka in the first round here, or does this mean they weren't happy with McMillan the way he was progressing through the season? I just don't know, but like you mentioned, I mean, that's 4 guys, and there's too many mouths to feed for Baker.
If I had to guess, and again, I would want to watch this is one I'd be curious to hear the press conference, see if you could glean anything from what they had to say. If I had to guess, the odd man out is McMillan. I would think that you would have Godwin, Evans, and Egbuka out there, and I think McMillan would just go back. I think he really came into the fold because of the Godwin injury, and he did well, for the time that he was there. But I just don't know if he's a permanent fixture in that offense.
Yeah, and maybe he isn't, and I mean maybe this pick reflects that.
So my first hate, and I'm going to try to go a little bit on the deeper side. We could easily go with some of the top names. But I'm going to go with running back Dylan Sampson out of Tennessee, who got drafted by the Cleveland Browns. I did listen to the press conference on this one and hearing what Andrew Berry had to say as it relates to Dylan Sampson. It sounds like obviously they really like his skills, but they see his value as in the third down role for that team. So a guy who I think a lot of people were excited about based on what he was able to do in his production at Tennessee. He had late round draft capital. I believe it was a 4th round pick that he was drafted. So, obviously the higher the draft capital, the better. That's what you'd like to see. And they already had drafted Quinshon Judkins earlier in the 2nd round. That to me, that's the concerning part. Unless Sampson ends up being proven to be the better back, and Judkins ends up being a bust, you're looking at Judkins, at least having the first 2 downs for himself. And then they're talking about Sampson as a 3rd down spillback. And to me, that limits his upside significantly. Had he gone to a place like Dallas, it would have been a dream come true. But ultimately, it didn't work out that way. So I don't. Obviously, the Browns are going to probably rely heavily on the run. So not to say that he is, left for dead by any means, but definitely not very excited about where he went to.
Yeah, I definitely could see that. It definitely caps his upside. Being that he's probably going to have that 3rd down role, like you said, and I mean, Quinshon Judkins has the body type to be a 1st and 2nd down back, and even he's got some receiving ability as well. So it definitely will be interesting to see how Cleveland utilizes both of these backs. But I do agree. I mean, of the available spots, I mean, you mentioned if he did go to a team like Dallas, I mean, we would have been a lot more excited about Sampson than we are, him just being the RB2 there in Cleveland.
I mean, more than likely, I would think when it comes down to Judkins, he's going to begin the end zone opportunities as well.
Yeah, right.
Red zone. So, I mean, again, he has breakaway speed. Sampson does. So, I mean, I'm not to say that he's, worthless by any means, but I just wish he could have went somewhere like Chicago or Dallas, but didn't work out that way.
Yeah, no, I definitely don't disagree with you there. Either location would have been a lot more interesting, but it's interesting for NFL. I can see it. I really like it, but for fantasy, it's where it really does hurt.
Absolutely. So, how about for you for your final hate?
Yeah, final hate. I went with another wide receiver, and it's going to be wide receiver Matthew Golden with the Green Bay Packers. Another happens to be another 1st round receiver that also is going to another crowded wide receiver room. And, I get potentially the Packers weren't happy, so they're taking these rookie wide receivers because they also drafted Savion Williams later in the draft as well, creating the most competition that they could possibly have. Just one thing that concerns me about, Golden is to me, watching the Packers, they truly lacked like a number one wide receiver, a true X receiver. I'm not sure that's what Golden is. I think Golden could be a nice complementary piece and a solid wide receiver too. I'm not sure I see him as a one. And, we already saw it just how the wide receiver room last year with Jordan Love for fantasy was like boomer bust production. Early on in the season, Jaden Reed caught fire. Later, he kind of, I feel like, fizzled out. And just they have so many guys in that wide receiver room as well. Thought they might just go with a bigger bodied guy, maybe even a guy like Jaden Higgins. But going with Golden, I know they did need a guy with speed to stretch the field, but I feel like maybe his value is maybe those home run balls, because we know as well, even though he ran 4.29, his after the catch stuff wasn't that impressive.
Yeah, I think this pick is indicative of. Well, honestly, it's kind of a nail in the coffin to Christian Watson is what it feels like.
Yeah.
With him, I think was it tearing his ACL or some type of significant injury.
Yeah, he tore his ACL.
And, yeah, and he was a big part of their plans. He was the guy who stretched the field. And I'm kind of with you on this. I don't like the landing spot either. Interesting that of all years where they draft a wide receiver in the first round, it ends up being Matthew Golden. Just kind of a head scratcher to me. When you consider, like you said, each receiver that they have there has its own strength. This does not seem like a guy who's going to be like the bona fide star in the offense. I think they'll use him for specific packages where they plan on using him, but he has a certain trait and they're going to utilize that trait, and then other guys are going to use for other traits. So he just adds to that Packers mix of just not knowing what's going to go on. I don't see him breaking away from the pack. So to me, it just I'm not very interested in him either, to be honest.
Yeah, and that's just kind of how I felt, because it was just like, the one guy you could bet on with the Packers offense was Jaden Reed. They draw up plays for him. He's the yard after the catch guy, creates. That's not Golden's game. So then it's like they're going to have to create extra opportunities for him, similarly to like Christian Watson on those home run balls, but he doesn't even, have the size that like a Christian Watson did either.
No, not at all. So my final hate, I'm going to stick with the wide receivers as well. I'm going to go with wide receiver Jaylin Noel from Iowa State, who now is a Houston Texan. And I think for me, it's a real crowded receiver room. You already have Nico Collins there. They drafted, Jaden Higgins as a counterpart to Nico Collins, who's going to play on the outside, who also played with Jaylin Noel. But then you've got Christian Kirk, who they have in a 1-year deal, I believe, left. He's in the slot. And then you've got Tank Dell, who most likely is out for the year. But, Tank Dell obviously has a great rapport with C.J. Stroud. He'll be out for the year. Christian Kirk is there. But then when Christian Kirk is gone, are you going to then see, Tank Dell pick it right back up? So then where does Jaylin Noel fit into that group? And that's ultimately my concern is I think there's just too many mouths to feed. I would have loved if he went to a different landing spot. I think he has a great potential. But ultimately, unless they feel that this Tank Dell injury is like career ending of some sort, or really feel like it's going to hamper him, maybe that'll change some things. But at least initially, they traded for Christian Kirk for a reason. So I think at the end of the day, you're not going to see, unless there's injuries that happen, I don't know how much of an impact Noel will have in his first year. And then time will tell as to what's going to happen with the Tank Dell situation. So I don't know. He's a guy that had a lot of buzz, and I just wish he would have went somewhere else.
Yeah. I don't disagree that I do wish he would have went somewhere else. Selfishly, I was kind of hoping the Broncos would take him at some point because they could use a kind of a slot receiver guy, but that didn't happen. I am wondering, if Tank Dell's injury possibly could be, career ending. Unfortunately, I mean, that was a gruesome injury. Year before, he already had broken his leg the year before as well in the Broncos game blocking. So just wondering if it's a tough road to come back from, and we'll see what kind of, if he still is that same guy when he does come back, if and when he does come back, I should say. But Christian Kirk is also a guy that deals with his own injuries. So like you said, in order for me to see Noel hit the field and really be able to impact, it'd have to be at the expense of Kirk getting hurt.
And that could very well be the case with Tank Dell, and that'd be disappointing. But we just don't know. And honestly, I would like to hear what Nick Caserio had to say about it. But who knows? He would probably come out and say that anyways. You'd have to,
Yeah.
read between the lines a little bit to kind of look into
Need the
that.
coach speak index on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you definitely would, because it's like, we'll see what they have to say. But I think it's possible that he could eventually get some more value, but ultimately, even to that offense is not very pass heavy to begin with. That offensive line was an absolute sieve. They're going to have to rely on the run game with Joe Mixon. So it's like, how many opportunities is he really going to have? At the end of the day, I was pretty disappointed with the landing spot.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I mean, he was somebody I had my eye on during the draft, and the fact that he was like still on the board for so long, I was kind of surprised. And then it was like, Texans, interesting. They went for both Iowa State wide receivers at the end of the day, as you alluded to there. But yeah, ultimately, I do wish he would have went somewhere else where he had a more of a clear path to opportunities.
So that does it for this episode. We went through 8 rookie selections that Joe and I both love and hate for fantasy football based on where they were taken in the NFL draft. If you want to know what we thought about these guys prior to the NFL draft, we evaluated them purely based on talent prior to where they were taken. Go ahead and check out that episode. We went through our dynasty rookie wide receiver rankings with tiers. We talked about wide receivers the most show. We talked about Terrance McMillan. We talked about Jaylin Noel. We talked about Emeka Egbuka. We talked about Matthew Golden. We talked about a lot of receivers. So you want to check that out. Thank you so much for tuning in, and until next time.